He came softly, unobserved, and yet, strange to say, everyone recognized him. That might be one of the best passages in the poem. I mean, why they recognized him. The people are irresistibly drawn to him. They surround him. They flock about him, follow him. He moves silently in their midst with a gentle smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love burns in his heart, light and power shine from his eyes, and their radiance shed on the people stirs their hearts with responsive love. He holds out his hands to them, blesses them, and a healing virtue comes from contact with him, even with his garments.
In this video, we will listen to and discuss the Grand Inquisitor, which is a chapter in the Brothers Karamazov. Now remember, in the last video, I stated that we all have a problem. It's evil. And this is a problem even if you're an atheist, for you must learn how to live in a world filled with unnecessary suffering, with the type of evil in the last video, the torture of children. Now we saw that Ivan presented an argument from evil against God, but also something much deeper, for he's not necessarily arguing that God does not exist. He's also arguing that he wants no part in God's plan, because there's no greater harmony that could make right this child being torn to bits. In other words, love sees in particulars, not universals. And the child being torn to bits is simply not compatible with love, no matter what happens in the future. So at this point, Alyosha protests and appeals to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the person who will make all right. Now Ivan then shares this poem. This story. It's called the Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor is in Book 5, Chapter 5 of the Brothers Karamazov, and the story begins with Jesus returning to Earth during the Spanish Inquisition. When Jesus returns, the people instantly recognize him and admire him. Let's take a listen.
My story is laid in Spain, in Seville, in the most terrible time of the Inquisition, when fires were lighted every day to the glory of God, and in the splendid auto da fe the wicked heretics were burnt. Oh, of course, this was not the coming in which he will appear according to his promise at the end of time in all his heavenly glory, and which will be sudden as lightning flashing from east to west. No, he visited his children only for a moment, and there where the flames were crackling round the heretics. In his infinite mercy he came, once more, among men in that human shape in which he walked among men for 3 years 15 centuries ago. He came down to the hot pavements of the southern town in which, on the day before, almost 100 heretics had, ad majorem gloriam Dei, been burnt by the Cardinal, the Grand Inquisitor, in a magnificent auto da fe, in the presence of the king, the court, the knights, the cardinals, the most charming ladies of the court, and the whole population of Seville. He came softly, unobserved, and yet, strange to say, everyone recognized him. That might be one of the best passages in the poem. I mean, why they recognized him. The people are irresistibly drawn to him. They surround him. They flock about him, follow him. He moves silently in their midst with a gentle smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love burns in his heart, light and power shine from his eyes, and their radiance shed on the people stirs their hearts with responsive love. He holds out his hands to them, blesses them, and a healing virtue comes from contact with him, even with his garments. An old man in the crowd, blind from childhood, cries out, "O Lord, heal me, and I shall see thee." And, as it were, scales fall from his eyes, and the blind man sees him. The crowd weeps and kisses the earth under his feet. Children throw flowers before him, sing and cry Hosanna. "It is he! It is he!" all repeat. "It must be he! It can be no one but him!" He stops at the steps of the Seville Cathedral at the moment when the weeping mourners are bringing in a little open white coffin. In it lies a child of 7, the only daughter of a prominent citizen. The dead child lies hidden in flowers. "He will raise your child," the crowd shouts to the weeping mother. The priest, coming to meet the coffin, looks perplexed and frowns, but the mother of the dead child throws herself at his feet with a wail. "If it is thou, raise my child," she cries, holding out her hands to him. The procession halts. The coffin is laid on the steps at his feet. He looks with compassion, and his lips once more softly pronounce, "Maiden, arise." And the maiden arises. The little girl sits up in the coffin and looks round, smiling with wide-open, wondering eyes, holding a bunch of white roses they had put in her hand. There are cries, sobs, confusion among the people, and at that moment the cardinal himself, the Grand Inquisitor, passes by the cathedral. He is an old man, almost 90, tall and erect, with a withered face and sunken eyes, in which there is still a gleam of light. He is not dressed in his gorgeous cardinal's robes, as he was the day before, when he was burning the enemies of the Roman Church. At this moment he is wearing his coarse old monk's cassock. At a distance behind him come his gloomy assistants and slaves and the Holy Guard. He stops at the sight of the crowd and watches it from a distance. He sees everything. He sees them set the coffin down at his feet, sees the child rise up, and his face darkens. He knits his thick gray brows, and his eyes gleam with a sinister fire. He holds out his finger and bids the guards take him. And such is his power, so completely are the people cowed into submission and trembling obedience to him, that the crowd immediately makes way for the guards, and in the midst of death-like silence they lay hands on him and lead him away. The crowd instantly bows down to the earth, like one man, before the old Inquisitor. He blesses the people in silence and passes on. The guards lead their prisoner to the close, gloomy, vaulted prison in the ancient palace of the Holy Inquisition and shut him in it.
Okay, so that gives you a feel for Dostoevsky's writing. Now, at this point, we see that Jesus heals the sick, cures the blind, he's raising the dead, and when the Grand Inquisitor sees Jesus in town, he knows who he is, and he orders him to be arrested. The Grand Inquisitor tells Jesus that you are not helping mankind. The Grand Inquisitor brings up these 3 temptations that Jesus faced in the desert, and he argues that Jesus was in the wrong while Satan was in the right. And so there's a long section here where they go through the 3 temptations. Now, it's interesting to note that both Jesus and the Inquisitor believe they are doing what's right. Jesus has a silent type of love, while the Inquisitor is focused on reason and using reason to bring about human happiness, kind of in a utilitarian way. So the first temptation is for bread. Now remember, Jesus was fasting for 40 days in the desert, and when he's tempted by bread, he says, man does not live by bread alone, but by the word of God. Now the Inquisitor thinks he should have offered freedom from hunger instead of freedom of choice. The Inquisitor believes that rejecting bread is telling people to embrace asceticism, and that's too hard for most people. Feed men, then ask them of virtue. Men don't want freedom, they want bread. Make us your slaves, but feed us. The Inquisitor then says the church offers bread, and we offer it falsely in your name. Most men are not elect. Most men are weak, worthless, and rebellious. And so we need bread, not the impossible ideal that you offer, Jesus. Jesus was right that men need something to live for, meaning and conscience. But Jesus demanded of men too much. There's too much vagueness, too much impossibility. Give us bread, not freedom. Satan was right. So let's take a listen to this section, the first temptation.
The Great Spirit talked with thee in the wilderness, and we are told in the books that he tempted thee. Is that so? And could anything truer be said than what he revealed to thee in 3 questions, and what thou didst reject, and what in the books is called the temptation? Judge thyself, who was right, thou or he who questioned thee then? Remember the first question. Its meaning, in other words, was this: thou wouldst go into the world, and art going with empty hands, with some promise of freedom which men in their simplicity and their natural unruliness cannot even understand, which they fear and dread, for nothing has ever been more insupportable for a man and a human society than freedom. But seest thou these stones in this parched and barren wilderness? Turn them into bread, and mankind will run after thee like a flock of sheep, grateful and obedient, though forever trembling lest thou withdraw thy hand and deny them thy bread. But thou wouldst not deprive man of freedom, and didst reject the offer, thinking, what is that freedom worth if obedience is bought with bread? Thou didst reply that man lives not by bread alone. But dost thou know that for the sake of that earthly bread, the spirit of the earth will rise up against thee, and will strive with thee, and overcome thee, and all will follow him, crying, Who can compare with this beast? He has given us fire from heaven. Dost thou know that the ages will pass, and humanity will proclaim by the lips of their sages, that there is no crime, and therefore no sin, there is only hunger. Feed men, and then ask of them virtue. That's what they'll write on the banner which they will raise against thee, and with which they will destroy thy temple. Where thy temple stood will rise a new building. The terrible Tower of Babel will be built again, and though, like the one of old, it will not be finished, yet thou mightest have prevented that new tower, and have cut short the sufferings of men for 1,000 years. For they will come back to us after 1,000 years of agony with their tower. They will seek us again, hidden underground in the catacombs, for we shall be again persecuted and tortured. They will find us and cry to us, Feed us, for those who have promised us fire from heaven haven't given it. And then we shall finish building their tower, for he finishes the building who feeds them, and we alone shall feed them in thy name, declaring falsely that it is in thy name. Oh, never, never can they feed themselves without us. They will understand themselves at last that freedom and bread enough for all are inconceivable together, for never, never will they be able to share between them. They will be convinced, too, that they can never be free, for they are weak, vicious, worthless, and rebellious. Thou didst promise them the bread of heaven, but I repeat again, can it compare with earthly bread in the eyes of the weak, ever sinful and ignoble race of man? And if, for the sake of the bread of heaven, thousands shall follow thee, what is to become of the millions and tens of thousands of millions of creatures who will not have the strength to forego the earthly bread for the sake of the heavenly? Or dost thou care only for the tens of thousands of the great and strong, while the millions, numerous as the sands of the sea, who are weak but love thee, must exist only for the sake of the great and strong? No, we care for the weak too. They are sinful and rebellious, but in the end they too will become obedient.
Okay, now we get to the second temptation, which is open to many interpretations. The second temptation is when the devil tells Jesus to throw himself down the mountain and let the angels save him. God will provide. This is a temptation because it seems to be appealing to pride instead of a humble submission to God. And Jesus rejects this and says, do not test God. Now, the Inquisitor interprets this rejection as a rejection of a miracle, which the Inquisitor believes is a mistake because he believes people need miracles to have faith. Jesus didn't come down from the cross. He didn't throw himself from the hill to test God's strength. He humbly submitted. It's as if Jesus wants free love, not the base raptures of the slave before the might that could overawe him forever. Jesus chose freedom and seems to believe God must be hidden in some ways so that people can freely choose love. But again, the Inquisitor says Jesus asked too much, since most people cannot endure or achieve this. They cannot just freely choose love. They need miracles. So the Inquisitor again says Satan was right and Jesus was wrong, for so much good comes from believing in miracles. And he says the Catholic Church has corrected his work.
Yet what was offered thee? There are three powers alone, able to conquer and to hold captive forever the conscience of these impotent rebels for their happiness. Those forces are miracle, mystery, and authority. Thou hast rejected all three, and hast set the example for doing so. When the wise and dread spirit set thee on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to thee, If thou wouldst know whether thou art the Son of God, then cast thyself down, for it is written, The angels shall hold him up, lest he fall and bruise himself. And thou shalt know then whether thou art the Son of God, and shalt prove then how great is thy faith in thy Father. but thou didst refuse, and wouldst not cast thyself down. Oh, of course thou didst proudly and well, like God, but the weak, unruly race of men, are they gods? Oh, thou didst know then that in taking one step, in making one movement to cast thyself down, thou wouldst be tempting God, and have lost all thy faith in him, and wouldst have been dashed to pieces against that earth which thou didst come to save. And the wise spirit that tempted thee would have rejoiced. But I ask again, are there many like thee? And couldst thou believe for one moment that men, too, could face such a temptation? Is the nature of men such that they can reject miracle, and at the great moments of their life, the moments of their deepest, most agonizing spiritual difficulties, cling only to the free verdict of the heart? Oh, thou didst know that thy deed would be recorded in books, would be handed down to remote times and the utmost ends of the earth, and thou didst hope that man, following thee, would cling to God and not ask for a miracle. But thou didst not know that when man rejects miracle, he rejects God too. For man seeks not so much God as the miraculous, and as man cannot bear to be without the miraculous, he will create new miracles of his own for himself, and will worship deeds of sorcery and witchcraft, though he might be 100 times over a rebel, heretic, and infidel. Thou didst not come down from the cross when they shouted to thee, mocking and reviling thee, "Come down from the cross, and we will believe that thou art he." Thou didst not come down, for again thou wouldst not enslave man by a miracle, and didst crave faith given freely, not based on miracle. Thou didst crave for free love, and not the base raptures of the slave before the might that has overawed him forever. But thou didst think too highly of men therein, for they are slaves, of course, though rebellious by nature. Look round and judge. 15 centuries have passed. Look upon them. Whom hast thou raised up to thyself? I swear, man is weaker and baser by nature than thou hast believed him. We have corrected thy work, and have founded it upon miracle, mystery, and authority. And men rejoiced that they were again led like sheep, and that the terrible gift that had brought them so much suffering was at last lifted from their hearts. Were we right teaching them this? Speak. Did we not love mankind, so meekly acknowledging their feebleness, lovingly lightening their burden, and permitting their weak nature even sin with our sanction? Why hast thou come now to hinder us? And why dost thou look silently and searchingly at me with thy mild eyes? Be angry. I don't want thy love, for I love thee not. And what use is it for me to hide anything from thee? Don't I know to whom I am speaking? All that I can say is known to thee already. And is it for me to conceal from thee our mystery? Perhaps it is thy will to hear it from my lips. Listen then. We are not working with thee, but with him. That is our mystery.
Okay, so the third temptation is where Satan shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world from a high mountain and says he can have dominion over all of them. But Jesus rejects this type of unification and power. He prefers the confusion of thought to a stable society, says the Inquisitor. Jesus could have made all one instead of choosing freedom and love, which only a few elect can achieve. Again, the Inquisitor disagrees and says the Roman Catholic Church will correct that. So the bottom line with these 3 temptations is Jesus was wrong and Satan was right, because Jesus Christ made the mistake of choosing freedom over security. And the Grand Inquisitor just doesn't understand why Christ does not understand the inherent weakness of men. Most men cannot use their free will to find love, salvation. And so millions of creatures are left out of salvation because of Jesus' rejection of the 3 temptations, his preference for freedom and freely choosing to love. The Inquisitor then explains that the purpose of the church is to do the work of Satan because it actually cares for the masses and wants their well-being. It doesn't just care for the elect. The Catholic Church follows the three temptations of Satan, but falsely tells people it's doing the will of Jesus. Okay, so how does Christ respond in this story? Well, Jesus responds with a kiss.
"How does your poem end?" he asked, suddenly looking down. "Or was it the end?" "I meant it to end like this. When the Inquisitor ceased speaking, he waited some time for his prisoner to answer him. His silence weighed down upon him. He saw that the prisoner had listened intently all the time, looking gently in his face, and evidently not wishing to reply. The old man longed for him to say something, however bitter and terrible. But he suddenly approached the old man in silence, and softly kissed him on his bloodless, aged lips. That was all his answer. The old man shuddered, his lips moved. He went to the door, opened it, and said to him, 'Go, and come no more. Come not at all. Never, never.' And he let him out into the dark alleys of the town. The prisoner went away. And the old man? The kiss glows in his heart, but the old man adheres to his idea. And you with him, you too," cried Alyosha mournfully. Ivan laughed. "Why, it's all nonsense, Alyosha. It's only a senseless poem of a senseless student, who could never write 2 lines of verse. Why do you take it so seriously? Surely you don't suppose I'm going straight off to the Jesuits to join the men who are correcting his work? Good Lord, it's no business of mine. I told you, all I want is to live on to 30, and then dash the cup to the ground." "But the little sticky leaves, and the precious tombs, and the blue sky, and the woman you love, how will you live? How will you love them?" Alyosha cried sorrowfully. "With such a hell in your heart and your head, how can you? No, that's just what you are going away for, to join them. If not, you will kill yourself. You can't endure it." "There is a strength to endure everything," Ivan said with a cold smile. "What strength?" "The strength of the Karamazovs, the strength of the Karamazov baseness."
So what does this kiss mean? Perhaps we could say there is something missing in the rational skepticism of the Inquisitor and in Ivan. Jesus' response is a mystical one because it implies that the answer is not one that can be expressed in words or understood by the intellect. Christ embodies and practices unconditional love. He's not like philosophers who just think about it. So in other words, there is no intellectual response to evil. Ivan has won the intellectual argument, but Ivan is missing so much. For one, Ivan and the Inquisitor have mistaken assumptions about freedom and happiness. So freedom is not the absence of constraints. True freedom is being free from addictions, anxiety, and all the entrapments of ego. This inner spiritual freedom is the key to happiness, not fulfilling desires, as Ivan and the Inquisitor thinks. So happiness is not based on the pleasure principle, which ends in new desires and emptiness. It's in the inner peace that comes from accepting life, together with all its joys and sufferings, on life's own terms. And love is in the particulars, seeing the face of God in each person you encounter today, not seeing them through the lens of an idea. And let me finish by saying something about Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was an Eastern Orthodox Christian. So in the Eastern Orthodox faith, the goal is not so much afterlife, but sanctification of this world. One must lose yourself in love to sanctify this world. And there's no real personal salvation, only salvation of the whole. Agape love is key. So you make yourself responsible for all the sins of all men, and that's the way to salvation. So in short, the answer to the problem of suffering is reached not through a theoretical insight, but through action that flows from the vision of connectedness, from the eyes of love.